My name is Tarek Willis. I'm part of the Women's Activity Portfolio in the UK. WAP are dedicated to supporting women and their families throughout their lives, and the key objective of our portfolio is to raise awareness about gender equality and gender-specific barriers women and men face. And importantly, the role that we can play to tackle those barriers for ourselves and our brothers and sisters. So I'm really excited to introduce our first ever International Men's Day event. WAP and the Ismaili community have commemorated International Women's Day for many years. And we felt it was time we also marked Men's Day, which is now celebrated in over 70 countries with rapidly increasing interest. For those of you who don't know much about it, International Men's Day celebrates the positive value men bring to the world, their families and communities. It highlights positive role models, raises awareness of men's well-being, and the importance of men leading by example to create a world where people can grow to reach their full potential. In the UK, one of the key themes for International Men's Day is promoting a positive conversation about men, manhood, and masculinity. So, the theme for today's discussion is exploring modern masculinity. I'm really pleased to introduce our two speakers to lead the conversation today. Dr. Akbar Lalani, an ex-British Army doctor and personal development coach, and Dr. Dan Guinness, Director of the Good Lad Initiative. So thank you both, Dan and Aki, for joining us today. I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Tarek, and to the WAP team for inviting us. It honestly is such a pleasure to be here tonight. This is the first time I've been invited into your community, and I'm pleased that this conversation is starting. As Tarek has said, tonight is going to be quite an interactive night. Where we're trying to share a little bit of our own personal stories, and then to open up spaces for you to talk to each other and to have a think and just have a discussion around this topic. But for that to happen, I guess you need to know a little bit more about myself and about Aki. I'm going to go first because I'm a complete stranger, I think, to everyone. You never know, but and then Aki will jump in. I'm, as you might be able to tell from my accent, I'm originally from Australia, and as will become important later, I grew up in a very sporting sort of a culture, but also one that valued education and studying. And I came across the UK, and while I was studying at university there, in the UK, I started to see the opportunities there were for men to have new conversations about who they were as individuals, who they were as a group, and really also how they could be an active, positive, energetic part of creating safer, more equal university campuses and cultures on campus. And from that point, which was about 8 years ago, I'm now running an organization that does work in corporate spaces, helping leaders figure out how to be leaders of more diverse teams and helping cultures shift. I do work in schools and universities, really there just helping young men find space outside of very narrow and restrictive stereotypes of who they have to be, like this peer pressure, these expectations that a lot of them feel. And also work in any other space really where there's men who'd like to talk and are really open to having like an exploration of who they are and what they're about. So I think for the moment that's enough of an introduction, because I'm going to give you a lot more later as the day goes on, and I'll pass to Aki.
Thanks, Dan. Hello, everyone. Some familiar faces, or at least some familiar names. Can't see many of your faces at the moment. It's a great pleasure for me to be back in the community. I have been absent for a while. My background, as Tarek introduced, thank you, was I joined the military as a doctor And in 2008, I served on the front line in Afghanistan, which was, I describe as the best and the worst experience of my life. It was at the height of the troubles there, and I was posted to a unit of airborne forces, very much in a remote region, the only doctor supporting them. And we sustained some significant casualties. There was a 1 in 5 chance of being killed or losing a limb. And being the only medic in charge of their care for 6 months was really took its toll on me. So my entry point into looking at masculinity, mental health, how I valued myself, how I saw myself as a man, really came out of, should we say, falling off the bandwagon from that experience. And I'll go into more details about that later. Coming out of that journey, I spent the last 10 years exploring all sorts of spiritual, emotional, psychological healing tools, and have found my way back to perfect health, if health can ever be perfect, but certainly better than I started. And I now work coaching men and women. Interestingly, it's been predominantly women I've worked with. But running individual sessions, group sessions, retreats, teaching overseas. The difficult experiences in my life have opened so many doors, which I'm grateful for. I've had the opportunity to talk at the Houses of Parliament, to run the Poppy Appeal, speak on mental health issues for armed forces veterans, and really just help men engage with talking about their mental health issues in particular. I think we as men find it really difficult to talk about our emotions, but we shouldn't. This is I think a throwback from his sort of historical expectations of men to sort of get on with life and just be the breadwinner, the provider, put burdens on their shoulders, support their family, and just sort of keep your head down and walk your path. But I think we all arrive at a point where that is no longer sustainable. And I'm really, really excited to be running this session with Dan to give you guys some tools. We're going to talk personally about our experiences because I think that gives you guys permission to open up. If we sit here and just pretend like we know it all and we've had a perfect life, then that doesn't give you an opportunity to open your little boxes of things that you've kept. I've been really inspired by the quote by Mahatma Gandhi of something like it's being the change that you wish to see in the world around you. And for me today is a stone being thrown into the water, and we're going to start seeing ripples moving forward in the community. But we have to start somewhere, and this is probably the most difficult session, the first one. I'm getting people motivated, engaged, and I hope we can deliver that to you guys. But it's a team effort. It really is up to you guys too. So I invite you to open your hearts and your minds, and make this the experience it can be.
Thanks, Aki. Can I also invite anyone else who's comfortable turning on their video to turn on your video? If anyone else is comfortable, it makes it a much more, we can start to see each other's faces, and it stops being great. About me and starts being more about you all. Fantastic. So the last thing before you launch into these stories is just to give a little bit of a definition of what masculinity is. And it was in the title slide, and also we had a few questions come before the session just saying, well, what is this thing? And straight away, I'm going to prefer to say I'll talk today about masculinities, about different masculinities, because the way that I use it is to describe the cultural expectations, the contextual expectations of what it is to be a man. So these are the things that in any place you go to, people will have an understanding of like, oh, that's what a man is, or these are the different ways that a man can be, that he can behave, that he should behave, that what sort of role he should play in the family, what sort of role should he play at work, how should he be like holding himself in the community. And it's just a useful way for us to say, okay, there are some expectations that we have of people, that we have of them because of their gender, because they are men and because we see them as men. And I think what Aki was already indicating was that it's also really important because some of those expectations that we have of what it is to be a man are expectations that we really internalize ourselves, and we judge ourselves against them. We feel bad if we don't live up to these things. We might make a whole range of decisions that might be quite costly to us, desperately trying to fit in with these expectations. So that's just a starting point for what we're going to talk about when we're saying masculinity. And it's an important starting point for me with my personal story. I thought I might ask, is anyone here at the moment dialing in from outside the UK? But my story begins in Australia. In that context where I was talking about, where growing up, I had one brother. My parents were working very hard to send me to a good school. A key moment in my childhood was when the friends that I was like in a close friendship group with got into some trouble, and my parents reacted by taking me out of the school that I was in and sending me to the private school on the other side of town, the independent school where I then did the next 6 years of my education. And maybe it was because I got ripped out and thrown into a place where I didn't know anyone and where everyone seemed to already have those connections. But I really felt that I was desperate to prove myself over years and years and years. And for me, the primary way that I thought I could do that was becoming good at sports, particularly really good at rugby. And I just invested so much of my identity in pursuing that dream that started off of just like trying to fit in and started to grow and grow and grow. And by the time I was 18, I was like, oh, I need to become an international player and have that sort of success. And when I get that, then these people really, really embrace me and accept me. And the problem was, while I was at school, I wasn't very good. My brother, who was 2 years younger than me, was faster than me and stronger than me. I was good at studying, but I always wished I wasn't good at studying and wished that I was good at this sport that he was, and that came so naturally to him. And then lo and behold, when I hit 2021, about 6 inches, so what's that, 15 centimeters, something like this, and I put on 25 kilograms of muscle, and all of a sudden the coaches of professional teams in the region were like, oh, this guy looks interesting, let's give him a chance. And I was so dedicated to the thing that I threw myself in there and worked really hard, and paid dividends, and I got some professional contracts. So the story is all very well up to this point, right, in lots of ways. Great. Firoz from Monaco, welcome. Thank you. So all well and good up until this point. The problem was that I was really completely invested for my whole identity in this career and improving myself in terms of my body, in terms of my strength, and in terms of my ability to play this sport. And so what happened in my story was that when I was 24, I had a series of accidents, and I ended up having 4 back surgeries. And I was left bed-bound, bed-bound for 3 months at a time, and really, really slow recovery. I was still studying at this point, and all my studies had to stop completely. And I can remember some moments where it was really socially challenging, like where I would have to be asking. At this point, I was living by myself in the UK, and I had to ask friends to come across to help me get in and out of the shower, to help me get changed, to help wash me. And it was just, for me, it was such a contrast in terms of my physical capacity, that that I really found it hard to deal with, having gone from pride in myself and my body and what it could do, to being really dependent on everyone else to do those things for me, even the simple things like get in and out of bed. And I can remember at one point breaking down with a really good friend of mine, in tears, and I was just like what's the point of me if this body's gone, if this career is gone? And that for me was actually a moment of crisis that then triggered a big change and a lot of realizations. And their answer, of course, was like, what are you talking about? Of course, there's a lot of value. You know, you're a wonderful friend. You're a good person. You care about others. You do these different things in the community. You do well at university. You're on track for things. There was other things in my life, but really the important thing for me in that moment was just to realize that the value I had placed on that one part of who I was and what I was doing was value taken from what I thought I had to be. And it was me trying to prove myself to everyone else and trying to prove that I could attain these things in my life, that I could be this great rugby player. And at least part of that was that it was that sporting culture and that achievement through athletics that was so prized among men that I was friends with and among men in my community. And I'm almost certain that there's no one on this phone call today for whom rugby is seen as being like the most wonderful thing that you have to do. Almost certain. And so I don't imagine that there's much of an affinity there. But I think that many of us will be able to identify that there's certain careers or certain ways that certain bodies that we should have, or certain characteristics that we should display that are expected, or that we feel that if we could just do that, if we could just achieve that people would really be showing us love and gratitude and we'd be satisfied. And I'm hoping that there's some parallels that you can think about in your own life, maybe in terms of that. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Dan. I had a couple of questions actually. Just you used the word success. And I think, as you said, for a lot of us, whatever career, whatever path we're on, there's a focus of success and it's linked to identity and masculinities. How does that sit for you, perhaps back historically, and how has your view changed now?
Yeah, I mean, I now almost can't imagine that view of success that I had. You know, like I look back at it and I'm like, what was I thinking? Why was I so caught up in that thing? And then at the same time, at the moment, I'm very proud of the organisation that I'm part of, and this work that we do in opening up conversations like this. I really am. I find it satisfying work and rewarding, and I think people, it's great to see when people connect with it. But I do catch myself still often being so caught up with this idea that I have to make the organisation successful. That if in a few years' time the organisation dissipates out and it doesn't exist anymore, that I will have failed somehow, and that I won't have that success. And I think there's really positive things to that ambition to do something you believe in, and I'm very much committed and energized by that. And at the same time, I need to caution myself when I start to sacrifice everything else in pursuit of an idea of what success is, and when I start to really associate me almost entirely with that success. And I'm going to be like, well, I'm more than that. I'm more than whether we do lots of work or good work or profound work or not. That's important, but it's not everything. So I think this is a really useful thing for me to still, I still have to sort of take a step back sometimes and reflect on it.
Great, thanks. And you talked about the sort of the emotionally dark days. Do you have any advice for people going through the same thing, things that work for you?
I think ultimately what worked for me was just connecting with people. And I think that just sounds so easy in moments when we're feeling strong and confident. So many conversations that I have with, well, mainly with men, they're like, you have a whole room of people, and they'll say, "Yeah, of course, we're all for supporting each other. This is great." Then, in the moment in their life or the moment in my life when I actually did need to reach out, I had all these things going through my head about, I don't want to burden them. They've gone through more than me. You know, the friend they ended up telling me had far bigger trauma in his life. You know, my problem's insignificant. I can deal with this. You know, I've dealt with other stuff. I can deal with this one too. I had all those things going through my head, and hold me back from just sharing that problem. And I think I'm not. It depends what language you're used to, but I think it's often these days we hear the language around resilience. And often that's imagined as being a very personal, individual, I'm strong, I can get through anything, you know, doesn't matter what problems hit me, I'm just going to keep going forward. And I think what I realized in this experience was that actually that resilience of myself was useful, but far more important was resilience that I had from being able to reach out to people and draw upon like a community to support me. And you know, later and since then, I've been far more aware about doing that early, rather than waiting to the point where I'd been feeling worthless and sitting alone in my room for, you know, for weeks on end, and only at that point when I was breaking down to reach out. Like, no, it's going to be a problem shared as a problem halved. So, yeah.
Thanks. Appreciate your honesty. It's not the easiest thing to do, especially with a group, but that's what we're here to do.
Yeah, thanks, Aki. And I mean, I think it's a very welcoming group. So thank you for you all as well, especially the smiles and nods and things like that. It's much appreciated. Thank you. So I'm now going to hand over to Aki to share more about those experiences that he's already introduced. So
thanks. So I'm gonna have a coming out moment, as it were. I know mental health issues are still kind of taboo within the community, and I really want to address that head on and be open and honest and say that when I was discharged from the military with a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress, having seen the amount of stuff I did. I had men die in my arms. I ran into a minefield to get to a casualty in the dark, so I couldn't see where my feet were going. Multiple times I almost died. And addressing the sense of grief, the sense of, as Dan mentioned, that pressure we put on ourselves. I'd gone out there as a 25-year-old doctor thinking I was going to save everybody. And that reality was constructed by my ego. That wasn't something that was my lived reality. And I think whether you relate to my experience or not, that's one of the key issues, is we each have an idea of what our life should be like. And 9 times out of 10, the reality doesn't match that. And I think that's where the idea of suffering comes in. It's the sort of mismatch between how we want life to be, or how we expect life to be, and how it actually is. So, I went from, having gone through med school, got my medical degree, got married, had this amazing career, was promoted to captain, sent out with this elite unit. People train really hard to become a paratrooper. It's a very prestigious job. And then one by one, each of those elements of my life was taken away. So I was discharged, I got divorced, I got separated from my daughter, I wasn't allowed to see her. I was taken to court about 15 or 16 times over custody issues. My pay stopped. I had to move out of the married home. I had to move home with my parents. So almost everything I had attached value to over the space of a year was taken away. And I really just sat there going, well, what is the point? Why am I still here? And I think in that dark moment, I had a breakthrough. I spent long enough sitting in that space, sitting with my emotions, sitting with my worst fears about the future. And I just screamed. I just said out loud, why did you bring me back from Afghanistan to bring me back to this? This is hell. And this voice said, we brought you back because this was the start of your journey. And this voice said, I've always been around you. I've always been with you, next to you, holding your hand, protecting you. I can't say any more about that experience other than it was a moment of revelation for me. And when I think back to my experience, all the professional soldiers were telling me not to make this run across this open field. There was machine gun fire and rockets coming in. And literally I could see the mud around me pinging with bullets, like little explosions around me. I have no idea how I made it across that field, but I did. And I think you look back at something like that, once you've finished unpicking all the negativity around it, you see, well, I had the grace of an experience which has changed my life for the positive. And I think when you arrive at that space of whatever your trauma, whatever your darkness is, whatever your dark day is, if you can find the light in it, if you can say, I've been through something, it's changed me, but it's taken away pieces that I didn't need, and it's made space for new stories to come in. I've had this experience with my daughter's bedroom. It's been empty for a number of years, and for a long time, I just couldn't go in it. It was like this sort of space of emptiness in my life. And then I changed my view of it. I began to see it, well, this is the space in which new stories are coming. And I started to put things that I enjoyed. I put my climbing kit in it. My cat started sleeping in the room all of a sudden. It was just these little synchronicities that made me realize that it's through our losses that new stories come. And I think you can start to give yourself permission to have a new story. I think we all go through suffering, and then there comes a point at which you say, well, actually, I have to become comfortable with not suffering anymore. I have to become comfortable with creating a new story. And for me, that's been the journey into my new work, is finding tools and helping people to help them change their mindset. And I think the one tool that's helped more than anything else is just 4 words. Compassionate acceptance brings change. Whatever your story, if you accept that God, whatever you believe in, has given you that experience for a reason, has not given you that experience to punish you or to take away, but has instead given you a space to grow and change and heal, then you allow change. But whilst your focus on it is more maybe victim-based, like, oh, this has happened to me and I can't believe, this is not changing. The more you put your energy and your thoughts into things being bad, they will continue to be like that. There's a lot of work in the medical field now. It's big in America. It's called mind-body medicine. The link between our consciousness and our reality. Quantum physics also plays a big part in this. So your creation of your reality is a reflection of the creation of your thoughts. So, a lot of people say, well, just think positively and things will change. That's true, but you also have to address what's lying underneath. And for me, that was the thing that took years to address. And it's just a case, as Dan said, of like sitting with those things every day, maybe weeks at a time, maybe months at a time, but have faith that things will eventually change. And subsequently to that, my life has evolved into something I could never have dreamed of. The opportunities, the chances to help people. Again, there's a quote from the Quran, which I'm not a scholar of it, but it's a quote that really resonates for me, and I think is also relevant today. And that is that when you save the life of one person, it is as if you save the life of the whole of mankind. And there is a truth to that, in that we're all connected, we're all beings, we all share the same space. If we change one, there's 52 of us on here. If we change 52 people's perspective on masculinity, doesn't have to be a profound shift, just even a modest shift, that ripple goes outwards. And that's why I feel so blessed to have had the experiences I've had, because it's given me an opportunity to look at myself, to look at how I related to masculinity. In medicine, it was very much the brains, and in the military is very much the brawn. And I was really lost in my identity within those sort of conflicting worlds of intellect and sheer power and physical ability, and how much you could bench press and how fast you could run. And to me, the thing I realized was those were actually all externalized identities around masculinity. They all came from society's projections at me of what I should be or how I should view myself. And when you start to embrace who you are, then you start to become more comfortable in yourself. And when you become more comfortable in yourself, then there's just a natural flow. It's like you're rather than being in a part of the stream which has a very heavy current and is sort of creating a lot of chaos around you, you sort of just step into the side of the stream where the water's flowing gently, and life just seems to flow around you. So that's been my kind of journey over the last 12 years.
Thank you, Aki. That was incredibly courageous to share that. And I'm sure I'm not the only person on this call who's really deep in thought, just trying to understand everything you've just given us there. It was amazing. Thank you. Really generous.
You're welcome.
I personally
thank you for
appreciate it a
having
lot.
me.
So there was so much here that you've reflected on, and so many moments that that sprung out as these moments that sort of changed your course. And I think one of the, and I'm going a little bit off what we said we might ask previously.
That's absolutely fine.
Yeah. But I was really interested, like you're talking previously at some points, being driven by ego, and then now coming to a point where you're comfortable with yourself. And would you be able to just contrast those two feelings as you experience them?
Yeah. When I say ego, I just mean as you're growing up, I think it's a common theme within the Ismaili community. There's a real focus on meritocracy, education, success, and that's a great attribute. But I think it also can have a negative impact. And I think I've reflected a lot on this. And one of the things I came to was that a lot of the community has come, from overseas, has sort of migrated here, and they came from different cultural expectations. And certainly my dad's family, came over and were refugees at Paddington Station for a couple of days, escaping from Idi Amin. And I think his his view was he didn't have those. He came from a place where they didn't have those things, and they were really keen for me to have those things. And I think it wasn't that there was a pressure. It was a pressure I put on myself. It was like, well, I've got all these opportunities. I must make the most of them. And like we've already established, so much of what we do to ourselves is self-inflicted. And so when I say coming from ego, it was just almost an impossible set of parameters I'd created for myself of things I had to achieve and do. And then reality kicks in, and then you go, well, this just doesn't match what I wanted, or how I had envisaged a lifelong career in the army, and set my pension point that was optimum for me, having a long career, and then got the short change when I was discharged, and still kind of giggle about the fact that I was a 30-year-old pensioner, but that's another story. But we just have to constantly reevaluate, and I think the internal view of yourself is the most important thing. Constantly saying, where am I? Business people make 1 year, 5 year, 10-year plans, but I think that's almost more critical for us as individuals, to look at who we are in this moment, how we're responding to the world around us, how we're responding to our family, and then make a plan of where do we want to be in a month, 6 months, a year. That's sort of making a timeline for ourselves and giving ourselves space to grow. Going back to that thing of the outer world reflects the inner world is to me been just the biggest learning point.
And that outer world, we saw lots of different contexts in your stories, and you've mentioned, the bodily focus in the military, and versus the brain's focus while studying. Did they also come with very different understandings of what a real man was, or what it was to be a man, what masculinity is, when you're in those different contexts?
I think that looking back at it, yes, I did internalize those views. I saw those as the things I needed to achieve, and of course, changing your physique to something completely different is not possible. You do with what you're given, so to speak, and same with intellect to an extent. And so it wasn't about, again, going back to the same thing. It wasn't about changing other people's. People all have their own unique talents, abilities, gifts. It's about finding my space within that, and how I relate to that. And there is a point which is uncomfortable, if you don't match up to how you feel you should be. But that's, again, that's all self-inflicted. It's, how I feel about myself is my story, my journey, and actually has no relevance to what other men in society are doing in that respect. I think there's an important learning point that I had a realization of, and for the Ismaili community, we have an external leader. We have the Aga Khan, the Imam, and our religious identity is derived from the external, and that is exactly how it should be. But then I think we can make a differentiation in our idea of masculinity, which is not related to the spiritual and religious point of view. Our identity as a man is not entirely based on the religious and faith view. So I think that differentiation also helped me, as realizing that there was a spiritual identity that was external, but the rest had to come from within me.
Thank you to Dan and Aki for giving up your time and leading the conversation and starting it within our community. We know it's really important, and it's something that's long overdue and needs to happen. So thank you for that.